McGraw-Hill, Living with Art, 13th edition, Part 5, Chapter 23, Contemporary Art Around the World. The art world today spans the globe, with major centers of artistic production, exhibition, and collection and art of many styles and media. Art today examines cultural heritage, the legacies of colonization and slavery, and diaspora. The Nigerian-British artist Yinka Shonibare is known for installations like Scramble for Africa that feature headless mannequins dressed in 18th or 19th century style clothing made of colorful wax-printed cloth. The textiles that Shonibare favors have a global history. Although widely used in West Africa for clothing, they are not African in origin. They were first produced around the 1900s by the Dutch, who developed them in imitation of the batik cloth made in Indonesia, which was at the time part of their colonial empire. The British soon began producing similar textiles, and both countries marked them to West Africa. Then part of the British and French colonial empires, where they became part of the traditional dress. These fabrics are still made in England and the Netherlands. Even things that were supposed to represent authentic Africa didn't turn out to fulfill the expectation of authenticity, says Shonibare. The textiles invite us to meditate on the complex back and forth of these relationships, which destabilize simple ideas about cultural authenticity and national identity. Kara Walker's installation, A Subtlety, confronts the space it was created for. The cavernous warehouse of the Domino Sugar Refinery in Brooklyn, New York. At its height, the Domino factory had been the largest sugar refinery in the world. It was shuttered in 2004 after 148 years of continuous operation, all but one of its buildings slated for demolition. Sponsored by an arts organization, Walker's installation allowed the general public to enter into the warehouse for the first and last time before it disappeared. As viewers walked around and through the space to experience her installation, they sensed the past was still present in the warehouse. The sweet and acrid odor of burnt sugar still hung in the air. Molasses still oozed from the walls and puddled on the floor. A Subtlety brought another aspect of sugar's past into the mix, its historical reliance on slavery. Sugar plantations operated by European colonists in Brazil and in the Caribbean were worked by enslaved Africans. The work was hard and dangerous, and the plantation owners treated the workers with utter disregard for their humanity and safety. This history added poignancy to the most imposing element of Walker's installation, a monumental sphinx with African features, a kerchief tied around her head, and a voluptuous nude body. Blindingly white, she seemed to be made of solid sugar. In fact, the sculpture was built from blocks of styrofoam and then coated with 30 tons of sugar. Walker described the figure as a New World Sphinx that not only referenced sugar plantations and enslaved people, but also what she called a Rolling Stonesy brown sugar dovetailing of sex and slavery. Scattered around the warehouse were the Sphinx's attendants, 15 life-size sculptures of African children carrying large baskets or lugging bunches of bananas, another commodity with a checkered social and political history. Some were made of caramel-colored sugar and gradually disintegrated over the course of the exhibition. Others, cast in resin and coated with molasses, remained mute witnesses of their companion's end. The project allowed viewers to appreciate the historical and current realities of sugar production and the lives it sacrificed. The installation's immense size evoked the industry's scale, yet its ephemeral materials were fragile and undone by time and nature. The questions that the artists of the 21st century posed through their work, and the great formal variety of their responses to those questions, served to map the territory of the word art. We now understand that art can manifest itself in many more ways than the 18th century philosopher who invented the category ever dreamed of. A painting, a sculpture, a video, an installation, a website, a computer program, a concept, a performance, an action. All of these and more are the art that we live with now. Art today questions state power exposes injustice, and disrupts the status quo. Performance artist Tatiana Bergera is also a new kind of global person. She was born and raised in Cuba, a nation that won its independence from Spain in 1902, lived with corrupt governments and foreign intervention for 50 years, and then experienced a communist revolution. Despite a U.S. embargo against Cuba, Bergera was able to study in the U.S. and today exhibits her works all over the world. An activist for artistic freedom, Bergera frequently finds herself at odds with the Cuban government and its oppressive policies. She has been arrested multiple times and yet continues to produce work that questions state power, exposes injustice, and disrupts the status quo. Bergera stated, "First, I looked at power and tried to understand what it was. Then I wanted to take the tools of power and use them within my own field. Next, I tried to acquire power by moving it into its own terrain. And now the power is performing for me with my own tools." Bergera's Tatooine's Whisper No. 5 brings the experience of government control to her audience. During the performance, 2 police officers ride horses within the exhibition space. The riders use the animals' imposing bodies to control how visitors move, pushing them to the side, encircling them, and dividing them into the groups. The exhibition's visitors experience a lack of autonomy as they are barred from moving freely about the space. For citizens of oppressive regimes like Cuba, Bergera's performance is a frightening reminder of how government controls their lives. As Bergera explains, having lived with state authority, even in this small scale, visitors emerge changed. It is harder to remain indifferent to the experience of others. She says, "I call my work the art of conduct," and she adds, "The idea is that the audience members will know themselves better, and that will probably, hopefully, make them better citizens." Art today examines global issues along with local history, culture, and forms and traditions, giving them new meaning. Issue-driven installations, photographs, performances, video, and conceptually inspired projects have been taken up by artists around the world as part of the global vocabulary of contemporary art. Just as important, however, are artists who continue to work with local cultural forms, renewing them to express contemporary concerns. In Pakistan, students of the National College of Arts in Lahore are required to study traditional Mughal miniature painting for 1 semester. Some of them become hooked, and often to their own surprise. Imran Qureshi entered the National College of Arts planning to study printmaking, but his professors convinced him that he was unusually gifted at miniature painting, and so he entered into the school's rigorous 2-year program. For the first year and a half, students absorbed the techniques and visual conventions of Mughal court painting by copying examples from the past. They learned how to experiment with their own creative direction in the last year. In Blessings Upon the Land of My Love, Qureshi employs the conventions and techniques of Mughal painting. Notice the isometric perspective, brilliant color, and descriptive details and texture. Instead of picturing the heroic deeds of a king, however, Qureshi uses a Mughal-like style to portray what at first glance appears to be the aftermath of a violent incident. Something awful has occurred, an assassination or a massacre. A closer look, however, reveals the pools of blood are composed of radiating flower petals. The painting transposes into another form, an installation of the same name that Qureshi created for a biennial held at the Emirate of Sharjah, where he covered a large courtyard with red spatters transformed into blossoms. The immediate inspiration for the work was the brutal murder of 2 young Pakistani boys, beaten to death by an angry mob in broad daylight as a crowd that included members of the local police looked on. Captured on video, the sickening incident sparked national outcry. The public's reaction seemed to Qureshi a sign of hope that some good might come of the violence, that the flowers might grow from the bloodshed. Borders and migration across the globe are the subject of Indian artist Reena Shani Kalat's woven chronicle. Colorful knotted electrical wires within thick borders define nations on the installation's massive world map. We recognize not just countries, but also continents and regions defined by color. Barbed wires drape across the globe, simultaneously crossing the borders and erecting barriers with their jagged points. Kalat, whose family was divided by a border imposed between India and Pakistan, explains that the barbed wires trace the history of human migration through today's movement of displaced persons, refugees, and laborers. Recordings of whirling machines, pulsating beats, horns, sirens, and birds' cries play from the speakers inserted in the map. The signal carried by the installation's electrical wires. The noise offers a soundtrack of global movement flowing along the same paths as the human migrant. The sculptor Sohib Pitch is one of the displaced peoples that Celeste's installation refers to. During the brutal 4-year rule of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, almost a quarter of the population died of starvation, overwork, torture, or execution. Pitch was a young child when the Khmer Rouge came to power in 1975. 4 years later, his family fled to a refugee camp on the Thai border, and in 1984 they came as refugees to the United States. Pitch eventually studied art, earning a master's degree in 1999. In 2002, he moved back to Cambodia. Pitch had been a painter in the United States, but his work changed when he returned to Cambodia. He turned to two of the most common materials of Cambodian village life, rattan and bamboo, and he began weaving them into sculptural forms. I sensed I was free from the art history that I knew, he recalls. Working slowly, I gave up notions of what the final work should be like and what the forms meant. Pitch's first woven sculptures were based on forms of inner organs, reflecting his time as a pre-med student before he turned to art. He made Buddhist images as well as memory sculptures of things he saw as a child during the Khmer Rouge years, but he resisted pressure to address at that time more directly in his work. I don't believe I went through or saw the trauma that others did, he says simply. I don't have an adult reading of it. More recently, Pitch has been making non-representational works in mixed media that exist between painting and sculpture. An example is Fertile Land, made of bamboo from the countryside and rattan harvested in the mountains. Its grid crossing secure with tight twist of wire, Fertile Land is painted with earth pigments that Pitch gathers on his travels around Cambodia and mixes with such materials as charcoal, warm wax, and resin made by boiling sap. Burlap used from rice bags adds texture. Works like Fertile Land, says Pitch, represent for me a kind of distillation of emotion, of remembrance, of reflections on what has influenced me or places that I have been. The places Japanese artist Koei Nawa visits for his art are virtual. Like many artists today, Nawa works in a series, each generated by a particular idea or strategy. For his series Pixel, Nawa begins by searching the internet auction sites and purchasing an object. He thus knows the object only as a two-dimensional image made of pixels on the computer screen. When he receives the object, now quite real, he covers it with glass, crystals, and acrylic spheres of various sizes. Like mutant three-dimensional pixels, the spheres transpose the object back into unreality. We can still sense its broad contours, but detail disappears under the distorting power of the spheres that multiply over the surface. In Nawa's words, the existence of the object is now replaced with a husk of light that shows a new vision, the cells of an image, for which he invented the term pixels. Nawa's Pixels series includes toys, musical instruments, shoes, and numerous taxidermied animals. The animals carry a special charge since they were once alive, and even as taxidermy, they retain a lifelike presence and texture. In the context of traditional Japanese culture, Pixel deer number 24 is especially evocative. In Shinto belief, deer appear as messages of the kami, nature spirits, and natural phenomena that are worshipped as sacred beings. Deer are also associated with the Buddha, who gave his first sermon at the deer park. German artist Hito Stirel creates the characters in her video installation, Factory of the Sun, on a computer and presents them in a theater-like setting filled with lawn chairs. A grid of glowing blue lines frame the dark space, immersing us into the story. Addressing the constant movement of information around the globe via digital media, Factory of the Sun uses images inspired by video games, dance videos, and documentaries. It tells of capitalism run amok and puts us inside the oppressive system. Germany has become a bank rather than a country, and businesses exploit their users' data and content. Scenes made using motion capture technology are interspersed with real documentary footage of protest and videotape figures wearing gold jumpsuits. A narrator named Julia explains that we are the captive workers within the video, our movements recorded and changed into sunlight. Another character represents the bank and asks whether we can exceed the speed of light. For Sterile, the light in the video is a metaphor for freedom, and the dancers represent the movement of data and images. Art Today responds to and reflects on digital and popular culture. Example 1, Koinawa's Pixel Cell Deer number 24. Example 2, Hitu Sterile Factory of the Sun. Art Today considers language and communication. In Harvest, the artist is thinking about language and its representation. Suspended from the ceiling close to the floor, 25 links of steel turn and twist in the air, fragments. It seems of some disaster that has left them broken and deformed. Each one is lit independently from above. Only if we shift our attention from the sculpture to the shadows that they cast does sense begin to emerge. Each shadow takes the form of a letter of the alphabet. Ortega asked his mother, a school teacher, to write out the alphabet for him in the beautiful penmanship of her generation and profession. His sculpture reproduces it, but only in the shadow. Critics have pointed out that the Latin word for the verb to read, legere, also means to harvest or to gather. In reading, we harvest the meaning from symbols, but only after we have the keys do we need to decode them. How long might this new alphabet of writing forms have resisted our attempts to make sense of it, or might we have even decided that there is no meaning to be found? Art Today reflects upon identity, including disability, gender, and race. Artist Christine Sun Kim also explores language and communication. In this piece, Words Shape Reality, Kim creates art that examines sound and words, their materiality, their collaborative nature, and the multiple ways that we experience them. Kim's work is part of a growing movement to make the art world more accessible. Like women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community, disabled artists of the 20th century routinely experienced discrimination. They had difficulties pursuing their studies, and their art was not taken seriously. The landmark passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, in the 1990s in the United States cracked open the door, but progress has been slow. Initial attention was forced on accessibility for museums and gallery visitors. In the new millennium, artists and activists have demanded that art organizations expand opportunities for disabled artists and art professionals as well. Kim makes much of her work with or about sound. An early project, she recorded everyday noises in her neighborhood, played them through powerful speakers, and let the vibrations draw with the powdered pigments and paintbrushes. In a more recent work, Kim placed monumental captions throughout a British city. Some described the sounds of the urban environment, while others were more interpretive, like the sound of plants wandering about right angles. Kim's billboard, Words Shape Reality, explores their similar questions and draws upon her interest in American Sign Language, its role in deaf culture, and its depth of meaning. Kim's work underscores how ASL is not the translation of the spoken word, but a unique and nuanced mode of communication with hands, face, posture, and movement. With this in mind, we can read many meanings into Words Shape Reality, created part of a billboard campaign sponsored by the activist organization For Freedom. Kim's written words on a billboard in Jefferson City, Missouri, ask us to reflect on their meaning. How is our reality shaped by words? What kind of words? Would reality change if we heard different words describing it, or if those words were not spoken but written or signed? As Kim explained, education for the deaf in America is so compromised and political. I want to use this billboard to draw more attention and support towards this issue. It's critical that there is a conversation about it, and as a deaf person, I want to be in people's mind as much as possible. Artist Christine's son Kim also explores language and communication in Words Shape Reality. Kim creates art that examines sound and words, their materiality, their collaborative nature, and the multiple ways that we experience them. Kim's work is part of a growing movement to make art more accessible. Like women, people of color, and the LGBTQ community, disabled artists of the 20th century routinely experienced discrimination. They had difficulties pursuing their studies, and their art was not taken seriously. The landmark passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, in the 1990s in the United States cracked open the door. But progress has been slow. Initial attention was focused on accessibility for museum and gallery visitors. In the new millennium, artists and activists have demanded that arts organizations expand opportunities for disabled artists and art professionals as well. Kim makes much of her work with or about sound. In an early project, she recorded everyday noises in her neighborhood, played them through powerful speakers, and let the vibrations draw with powdered pigments and paintbrushes. In more recent work, Kim placed monumental captions throughout a British city. Some described the sounds of the urban environment, while others were more interpretive, like the sound of plants wandering about right angles. Kim's billboard, Words Shape Reality, explores similar questions and draws upon her interest as in American Sign Language, ASL, and its role in deaf culture. And the depth of meaning Kim's work underscores how ASL is not the translation of the spoken word, but a unique and nuanced mode of communication with hands, face, posture, and movement. With this in mind, we can read many meanings into Words Shape Reality, created as part of a billboard art campaign sponsored by the activist Organization for Freedoms. Kim's written words on billboards in Jefferson City, Missouri, ask us to reflect on their meaning. How is our reality shaped by words? What kind of words? Would reality change if we heard different words describing it, or if those words were not spoken but written or signed? As Kim explained, education for the deaf in America is so compromised and political. I want to use this billboard to draw more attention and support towards this issue. It is critical that there is a conversation about it, and as a deaf person, I want it to be in people's minds as much as possible. British painter Jenny Saville takes flesh rather than words as her subject. Working in a loose painterly style, Saville paints bodies, specifically women's bodies. She paints them as landscapes of flesh shaped by time, pain, love, desire, illness, deformity, and violence. I am trying to find bodies that manifest in their flesh something of our contemporary age, she has said. I am drawn to bodies that emanate a sort of state of in-betweenness, a hermaphrodite, a transvestite, a carcass, a half-alive, half-dead head. If they are portraits of an idea or of a sensation. Saville prefers working from photographs to working from a live model. She collects vast numbers of photographs, some of which she has taken herself, others which she culls from medical textbooks, forensic science books, and the media. She has observed surgeons at work to understand what it is to cut into and enter a body. Her monumental paintings are often as disturbing as they are compelling. Their scale engulfs the viewer, and Saville intends this. She hopes that the viewer will approach until the image dissolves in an intense, all-encompassing awareness of the sensuous physicality of the paint itself and the varied markings and densities on the surface. Example 2, Kara Walker, A Subtlety, or The Marvelous Sugar Baby, an homage to the unpaid and overworked artisans who have refined our sweet taste from the cane fields to the kitchens of the New World on the occasion of this demolition of the Domino Sugar Refining Plant, 2014. This concludes Chapter 23.